a slide. Even in '08, we were fine. Knock on wood. You know, Reyes is done in a month. Gary Reyes is retiring in a month.
He is, huh?
Yeah.
And then what's he gonna?
Well, he's got a place in Vinton.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's just gonna retire. He's over it.
Good for him.
You get a lot of land there for, or you get a big house, or live cheap, what?
I'm older.
Yeah.
All my buddies are all downsizing. Matter of fact, I'm helping this chick this weekend. Well, she's sold it. Check this place out.
Where are you living now?
Downtown.
Downtown?
Yeah, I've been down there. I've been here about 5 years.
Still taking the truck home?
She's having a sale this week, so.
Whoa.
She comes to
Yeah, just a courtesy call, I'm sure. I'm sure.
and she's got a house in here in K-Town as well. So she's like,
Nice place. What'd you sell it for? How much?
she works with Bitcoin. She says,
Really?
You're the craziest fucking story. Figure that one out.
Okay, she's not.
No, she is.
I'm gonna be the first one.
Shut it down. I said, no.
They're like, I don't want to do that.
I don't want to. I said, run that one by me again.
How's that possible?
That's what I said. How can you swing that? And she explained to me. So good. We're still playing. She's wrong.
You're not gonna.
I might. I can if I want to.
That is, right.
They're used to pedals.
Yeah, I think you're,
Right. They're used to dogs. oak tree and sagebrush mixture.
Driving.
It smells range free, bro. Free range.
Right upstairs.
Dude, I want to kill my camera. Too much, too many.
This will look better than that.
Already, for us. It's gonna get scary around here. Yes. Oh, yeah. Reds.
I was talking to him,
What is this?
he said he was gonna have it at the same place, where it was committed sometime. In Burbank on Holmes Street.
Flame jumper?
Down at Stone. Is he still gonna have it there?
Who, Gary?
Yeah.
He's having two parties, one at Los Toros and one there, yeah.
Where's Los Toros at?
It's in Northridge.
And the other one on Burbank is in a couple of weeks.
Los Toros is November 22nd.
Oh, okay. And then the other one?
Probably a little after that.
Oh, okay.
Ah, tú tienes el dato del cultivo. Ah, ajá, son 15,000. Sí. Sí, yo ese dato no lo tengo, solo lo he mandado redondeado. Como que pueden, que podría ser. Ajá. Él me ha dicho que si no tiene nada, porque como el tuyo, tu noticiero nacional, estatal. Ah, es que como, imagínate que el tuyo nacional, sí, y primero va local y si local da datos exactos, entonces tengo
Yeah, I saw that. I always struggle to hook that thing on my tripod, but that's weird. Right.
Yeah, maybe two, maybe less. You got that stuff?
Entonces se van a meter en ese ya mañana. Sí, pero de eso no me está verdad.
Go fishing with a shotgun.
Pero ustedes tienen imágenes.
Go fishing in Rose.
Porque nosotros no tenemos.
Do something, find something to do. Oh, yeah.
What I think I'm gonna do is, I want to find a church. This is going, a lot of churches that have a lot of,
All right, thanks everyone for your patience. Just about to get started now. Appreciate your flexibility. Governor's getting briefed by his emergency officials, so he has the latest information for you and what's happening. He'll talk, they'll take questions after, and then the first responder folks will make available if you want pull asides afterwards too. sorry for the heat. It's a little.
Do you have like a minute heads up so we can know about our stations?
Yeah, so we'll get briefed for the next, what, 10 minutes or so?
Yeah.
That's fine.
They're moving out of the brief. They've been doing that.
Okay.
I got a text. We're close.
Close, okay. It's government.
It probably depends
We
on
know
us.
it's close. Some of the, first screen and title, we're waiting for just one minute.
Hey, brother, we're getting close, they said. All right, thank you, sir, appreciate it. He's on board. Last night's thing was good.
Yeah, well,
Till the
they
end,
blew it
till the
out.
end, they blew it out. I want nationals to win. Nah, Houston's good, huh?
Thought so.
All right, 1 minute out.
1 minute out.
Sure.
I just do what the people tell me. There appear to be movement and action.
Okay.
1 minute.
Diligent servant of my colleagues in the press.
Seconds.
You guys are gonna hold me to this.
We're gonna count you down, though.
Yeah, I got your 10-second countdown.
Tough market here now.
5 seconds.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time. We have a number of folks assembled behind me, the Director of the Office of Emergency Service, the Chief of CAL FIRE, and our Director of Health and Human Services to answer any questions. But we wanted to give the public an update on where we are in this state as it relates to wildfires and as it relates to the issues of power shutdowns in this state. As many of you are familiar, less perhaps here in Southern California, but certainly those in Northern California, the largest investor-owned utility in the state of California, PG&E, has been advancing significant power shutoffs, what we refer to commonly as PSPS, Public Safety Power Shutoffs, blackouts, perhaps vernacular of others. A week or so ago, close to 2 million individuals were impacted by those power shutdowns. Today, we have roughly 178,000 customers that have been impacted by now the latest power shutoffs. Not immune from power shutoffs, but then again, not necessarily surprised by them either here in Southern California, particularly in San Diego, that has advanced similar strategies now for over a decade. People are being impacted, beginning here in the 7-county area that is under Edison's jurisdiction. We anticipate in the extreme, this has not yet happened, the prospect of some 308,000 customers being impacted. Currently, I believe it's roughly 15,000, if that is correct. In San Diego, a universe of roughly 41,000 customers, again, in the extreme, are potentially going to be impacted by power shutoffs, roughly 3,000 currently. So let me give you that again so folks can understand the magnitude on the high end of what potentially can be anticipated. 308,000 in Edison's jurisdiction, 41,000 customers in San Diego Gas and Electric's jurisdiction, and 178,000 already impacted in PG&E's jurisdiction. we have weather conditions throughout the state of California that are very analogous and also very familiar to many of you, to the 2017 fire season that led to the Thomas Fire. We have extreme weather conditions all throughout the state of California, northern, central, and southern California. These conditions are multifaceted. It's not just dry weather, it's high winds, low humidity. And a consequence of these characteristics aligning as they have, we are taking precautions, not just the utilities, but the state itself. And I want to speak to the state's role in this partnership on public safety. You may recall a number of months ago, we initiated historic investments in vegetation management, forest management, and investments in fire suppression, as well as prevention strategies throughout the state of California. In early January of this year, we initiated through an emergency declaration 35 high-profile projects impacting 200 vulnerable communities in this state by moving aggressively our resources to prepare for the upcoming wildfire season. $1 billion was invested this year to address the issues of public safety related to wildfires in this state. $109 million, as an example, for new Black Hawk helicopters, outfitting of now 7 C-130s. The Black Hawks, by the way, allow us nighttime suppression strategies. The old equipment, the old Huey helicopters, did not provide for that. We pre-positioned an unprecedented number of assets, fire engines throughout the state of California. Chief Porter can talk more about that, but 18 pre-positioned engines above and beyond our peak capacity were provided in this year's budget. Hundreds of new firefighters were made available in hotspots, anticipated hotspots all throughout the state of California. We anticipated the possibility of significant power outage by providing $75 million in this year's budget to be made available to support communities large and small, to make sure we harden critical assets like state hospitals and critical roads and bridges, and certainly tunnels, to make sure that we have backup generators, to make sure we have the resources that can be quickly deployed in anticipation of this kind of disruption. We are doing everything in our power to continue to build capacity and partnerships with cities and counties, but I must confess, it is infuriating beyond words to live in a state as innovative and extraordinarily entrepreneurial and capable as the state of California, to be living in an environment where we are seeing this kind of disruption and these kinds of blackouts. And while I want to chalk it up, as someone who believes deeply in that the hots are getting hotter and the dries are getting drier and the wets are getting wetter, that it's just climate change, it's more than just climate change, and it is climate change. But it's more than that. And as it relates to PG&E, it's about dog-eat-dog capitalism meeting climate change. It's about corporate greed meeting climate change. It's about decades of mismanagement. It's about focusing on shareholders and dividends over you and members of the public. It's a story about greed, and they need to be held accountable. I don't think any objective observer can look at Pacific Gas and Electric and suggest that that entity, that corpus that operates in so many counties across the state, can possibly survive. They're in bankruptcy already because of their choices. But when they come out of bankruptcy, that has to be a completely reimagined company. And we are doing everything in our power to make sure that that is indeed the case. But as it relates to the other utilities, they also need to be held to account. Edison and SDG, they better get serious about partnerships with the state of California. For months and months, for close to a year now, we've been meeting on a consistent basis every damn week with these guys, laying out protocols, and they're not meeting those protocols. I don't think they get it. But they're about to get it. We have a new director of the Public Utilities Commission. We we have different oversight capacity, they will be held to account. They better step things up. This is simply unacceptable. 21st century in a state like ours, an economy as vibrant as ours, with all our capacity and ingenuity, to see this kind of disruption, potentially putting the lives of millions of Californians at risk because they can't access critical care or even water in some cases, is unacceptable. I will forgive them the new realities and the acuity of a climate crisis of which we are feeling its impacts perhaps more than any other state in the nation. But I will not forgive them for not making the kind of investments in their equipment, hardening and undergrounding, and anticipating this new reality of which they have had ample time to anticipate. I got here 9 months ago. I'm accountable. But I got here with a bankrupt utility and with decades of our own, respectfully, mismanagement as it relates to our fires and our inability to address vegetation management and forest management over the course of decades as well. We are doing everything in our power. I can assure you, the public, while accountable, we are also doing everything in our power to move through this process and to get us out on the other side more vibrant, more strong, more reliable, more safe, and, yes, more affordable. We have your back, and we're doing everything in our capacity to advance our policies and our principles and our values and get through this peak period of our fire season. We have survived relatively well this year compared to previous years. But we are by no stretch of the imagination done with this season. As we move into November, you may recall last November, the Woolsey fire and the Camp Fire. And it is incumbent upon us not to run the proverbial 90-yard dash this year. Let's get through this fire season, and we will reassess where we are and where we are going. But I assure you that, well, folks will be held accountable, the IOUs, and we will do everything in our power to double down on all of our efforts, of which have been historic to date, but are still inadequate to meet the needs of 40 million people that deserve and demand more. We hear you, and we recognize our responsibility to do more and do better at the same time. So that's my long-winded, forgive me, opening statement, but I wanted to lay out a framework. And I want to now introduce the Director of the Office of Emergency Services, who can talk perhaps a little bit more about the San Bernardino fire and our response and what's happening up at the Kincaid fire in Geyserville in Northern California, and perhaps lay the groundwork for the kind of mutual aid and other emergency response that we have set out. Perhaps, Mark, you could talk a little bit more about National Guard resources that we have made available, the CHP resources that we have made available for infrared support so we can get this electricity back on, and then provide a little bit more about the totality of our pre-positioning and response. Thanks.
Very great. Thanks, Governor. Good morning. Mark Ghilarducci, the Director of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. First, I'd like to just provide a quick update on the substantial work that is now underway by the state, building on the governor's comments on his direction and our preparation for the dangerous fire weather that we are seeing statewide, and what we're doing to manage the consequences of the utility's decision to turn the power off over the large swaths of area throughout the state. Our first priority, though, is and foremost always remains doing whatever is necessary as a state to protect lives and ensure that our communities are safe, and that is continuing to be job one. As a result of the statewide fire conditions and in an effort to respond adequately to these widespread outages, the governor has activated the State Operations Center in Sacramento, as well as our regional emergency operations centers throughout the state. And we have called in agencies from across state government to embed them in the State Operations Center to proactively respond to emergencies that may arise as a result of the fire conditions as well as any downstream impacts from the power shutoffs as they occur. OES is also, as the governor mentioned, pre-positioned fire assets. These are fire strike teams and helicopters and dispatchers from OES and from local government throughout the state, ready to respond quickly. They're strategically placed for any new wildfire starts that may occur in these elevated conditions. These prepositions include over 100 engines from the Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid System. These are assets from local governments from throughout the state that are supporting the state Fire and Rescue Mutual Aid System. We also continue to work very closely with our state partners to ensure that the government is thinking ahead to solve problems before they arise and to properly execute any continuity plans or continuity operations to minimize the impact to the operations that support California residents. The governor mentioned work that Caltrans and others are doing, the state hospitals, to ensure that there's resiliency as a result of the power shutoffs. And I can assure you that those state agencies are actively leaning forward to make sure that there are no blips in that effort. Some other key actions that we have done across state government include some of the following examples. We have increased the CHP staffing for security, traffic control, and increasing their patrols in areas where the power is now out throughout the state. CHP is also providing air assets in the form of a fixed wing with specialized infrared camera capability on it to assist PG&E in their power line inspections, to buy down or to reduce the amount of time it takes to restore. The intent is to help PG&E get that power back on as soon as possible. We have Caltrans engaging in checking on rail systems and the tunnels, particularly not just Caltrain, but all of our regional transit systems, to ensure that they have appropriate backup power and they can operate without interruption. As the governor mentioned, we have tasked the California National Guard to stand up personnel and equipment, put them on standby, as well as its facilities and armories across the state, as we may need generators or extra manpower or air assets. The Guard is on a short callback to be able to respond as necessary. We have the Emergency Medical Services Authority, which has tasked a fleet of ambulances, more than 40. They are on standby across the state to transport anybody who is sick or injured, or if we have hospitals, for example, care facilities that may need to be evacuated rapidly because of the fire or because of the power outage, that we can support that operations. Our Department of Education is coordinating with schools across the state, try to minimize disruptions, to keep as many children in school as possible, and making sure that there's strong communications with parents. Our Department of Water Resources is securing the state's water project to make sure that water continues to flow to families and business and farmers, very critical for both water, wastewater, and our economy, that happens. And so we have backup capability and power generation at all those water pumps. And our Department of Technology continues to support PG&E. We have them embedded in PG&E's Emergency Operations Center, and they're supporting that utility with technology expertise to ensure that their website and their communications modalities, the way that they're communicating with the public, continues. And lastly, our Food and Agriculture, Department of Food and Agriculture is working closely with farmers and food distribution centers throughout the state to ensure that the food can be retained, and that any of the harvest operations which are happening at this time throughout the state continue. CalOES continues to coordinate closely with all these agencies, as well as with local law enforcement throughout the state and community leaders to provide that support that's necessary, make sure that these communities have all of what's necessary for public safety, or in the event that evacuations are necessary, to support that. Like the rest of our state, all of us would prefer not to be in this situation, but at OES, as well as at the allied responders, all of our state agencies across the state will continue to answer the call in this difficult time and we will continue to be very much on point. That State Operations Center and all these assets will remain in full operations mode through the weekend and as long as necessary until we get through this process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Director of CAL FIRE, Chief Tom Porter, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically about the technical operations with the fire operations in the state. Chief Porter.
Thank you, Director Ghilarducci. So, dangerous fire weather, that is exactly what we have. And we've had that all week here in Southern California, moving to Northern California the last couple of days. That will be winding down coming into this evening, and then we're going to have a ramp up of the winds and the weather conditions here again in Southern California. As stated before, this is nothing new, but it is something that we have to be prepared for this time of year, every year. What is important to understand is how far we are leaning forward during this event. Director Ghilarducci mentioned over 100 pre-positioned fire engines on the local government side. Those are immediately available to the state when we have wildland fires that we need to attack. In addition to peak staffing that CAL FIRE is remaining in, thanks to the governor's extension of our peak season, we would have laid off firefighters on Monday in a normal scenario. We did not do that. We have extended our season. We have all of our firefighters, fourth firefighter on a third of our engines, all things that Governor Newsom has added to our state firefighting resources on the state responsibility side. So that's over 200 engines that are on today that wouldn't have been under normal circumstances that are immediately available to fighting these fires. Come to last night. Last night, after it got dark, 9 o'clock, a little bit later, we had the fire start, the Kincaid. Burned very quickly through light, flashy fuels under wind-driven conditions. We had 15 engines that were pre-positioned from local government through OES that CAL FIRE were able to dispatch to that fire. Those engines, along with the CAL FIRE resources, have helped to keep this fire to as limiting and damage that it has been thus far. We have a long way to go. That fire is currently 10,000 acres, 0% contained. We have deployed one of our incident management teams on that fire, and I expect by nightfall we're going to start to see some containment numbers coming up. Still a lot of challenge there. 600 homes were evacuated, 200 additional precautionary, and we know that there is some damage up there. We are looking into that as well. Come south to the old water fire here in San Bernardino County, 75 acres. That fire didn't have quite the winds on it that the Kincaid did, but it had very dry conditions that have been persistent over the week, and a little bit of wind, and it could have been a lot worse, but it is pretty well knocked down. That is a local government fire. That one also, 10 engines that were pre-positioned in the area immediately went to that fire, along with state and federal resources to make sure that we kept that as small as we've been able to. We will continue to fight every single fire aggressively and meet our initial attack goal, which is 95% of all fires out at 10 acres or less. And we've been doing that consistently through the last PSP event a couple of weeks ago. There were over 1,300 fires that we responded to, and only a handful grew to sizes that the rest of us heard about in the media. So far, in the last 3 days, 600 plus fires. We have 2 that I'm talking about today. We are very successful at keeping fires small. Certain conditions make it very difficult to do so. The additional resources and capabilities that the governor has given us are helping us to meet that goal every day, and CAL FIRE will continue to do so on behalf of the state, but also in conjunction with all of our mutual aid partners. Thank you.
I don't think there's a fire department in the country better equipped, more skilled than CAL FIRE, and no Office of Emergency Service that is more prepared and professional than the Office of Emergency Service. I'm very proud of these guys and the work they do every day. I made this point the other day up in Northern California. I want to make it here in Southern California. To the men and women that are working at Edison and SGGE, please be respectful. We had some incidences up in Northern California against the men and women working at Pacific Gas and Electric. They're doing their best to keep you safe. Please respect their work. They did not create these problems. They're working hard every single day, and it's just incumbent upon us to advance civility at a time when people rightfully are frustrated and angry and fearful. But I just want to maintain that level of decency, particularly to those line workers that are doing what they can. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
You said there were some protocols.
Yes, sir.
You said there were some protocols that SCE and SD and G&E had not upheld. What are those protocols?
I'll let Mark speak to those specifically, since he's been in these weekly meetings now for many, many months. I sent a letter today to the board chairs and to the CEOs of the three respected, the largest investor-owned utilities in the state of California, laying out exactly what we expect as it relates to communication, notification, as it relates to collaboration, not just at the state level, but the local level. Those protocols have not been met. As I said in the letter, the only thing consistent about the protocols is their inconsistency and meeting and matching the expectations and the written word agreement. With that, I'll let Mark talk a little bit more specifically about what those look like.
Thanks, Governor. So to the Governor's point on consistent protocols, what we had come to an agreement on with each of the utilities is that they would make notifications to the State Warning Center 72, 48, and 24 hours out. The idea behind these particular timeframes is designed to allow the maximum ability for local government and the public to prepare for when we back on? So this has to do with when it's designed about local government and the public to have enough time to prepare. In the time from the 24 hours to the point of de-energization, we also come to agreement that the utilities can in fact be assessing the weather conditions and the various different kinds of index ratings that they have to make the final determination just prior to actually pulling the trigger for de-energization. The issue has been that all three of the IOUs, while they have the protocols, have been inconsistent in following those protocols. And it's very difficult to agree to a set of protocols, particularly in the area of the way public safety operates, and then have to be able to sort of react to a different set of protocols in the midst of the crisis. And so this is what the governor's talking about, and this is important because we want to try to get a much more consistent approach as these PSPSs take place.
And I'm going to get to every question. Let me just amplify one point, just again for the benefit of some of you down here that may not have followed as closely up in Northern California. I'd just remind you what happened just a week or so ago with Pacific Gas and Electric. They couldn't even keep their website up. The state of California had to come in and fix their website for them. They couldn't even keep up with their call volume and their call center, and yet we were made available resources, and they said, no, we got this. They talked about resource centers so people could charge their phones, get water, whatever they may need, and they provided an inadequate number of resource centers in the counties that were impacted. I will say on all three areas, got to call balls and strikes. They have significantly increased the number of resource centers with this power outage. They have addressed their website, and they have significantly enhanced the number of personnel at their call center. That's more like it. However, the fact that with all that anticipation, all of that work and all the protocols that were established in the weekly meetings on a consistent basis over the course of the last 9 months, that even had to happen, shows the level of mismanagement that persists at that IOU. So that's the kind of thing we expect you should demand of these private sector corporations in the state of California. And that, again, goes to the core of what I'm trying to communicate. The issues of corporate greed, meeting the issues of climate change, have created these conditions, and we have to go to the root of what lies underneath so that this does not occur in the future.
You said that they will be held accountable. What does that look like? And what's the long-term solution here? Does this mean complete public power?
Held accountable through the Public Utilities Commission. I have a new chair of the Public Utilities Commission as we speak. She's up in Redding, California, doing public hearings last week. She was very pointed in terms of her expectation of accountability, transparency. We are assessing costs associated with these blackouts. I encourage people, especially businesses, but also individuals that have been impacted by losses, to assess those losses. And we have demanded that PG&E, and I expect the same, the other IOUs, consider reimbursements. And to the extent they don't, the PUC has the authority and capacity to demand more. So the Public Utilities Commission is uniquely positioned to enhance their compliance, to magnify their accountability to the extent that they do not comply. I want you to know that there was a very comprehensive bill that we passed in last legislative session that requires, among other things, $5 billion of public safety improvements by the 3 largest investor-owned utilities in the state of California. There are specific timelines associated with that, and there's accountability attached to that. There are a series of other specific things in that bill, which I'd encourage you to take a look at, that go to the core of the second part of your question: how do we secure that this doesn't happen in the future? And we laid out a strategy and a pathway to secure a brighter future, a more sustainable, safety-oriented future that focuses on reliability and affordability. So in that framework, you will see the answer in detail, in prescriptive terms, to your question.
But just a quick follow-up.
Is there any indication of utility equipment involvement in contained fire? And what do you say to the public after power has been cut off in that very area, and yet a major fire?
Yeah, it hasn't been assessed yet. They'll do that investigation. Again, this fire occurred less than 24 hours ago. Important proof point of the frame of your question. I'll remind you that the Camp Fire in Northern California, Butte County, that where we lost 85 plus lives, they had peak winds at 60, 65 miles an hour the night before the fire. PG&E chose not to de-energize. Had they chosen to de-energize, likely those lives would not have been lost, and the historic damage may not, it's hypothetical, have occurred. It is the nature of the difficulty of this situation. And I began my remarks by making a point of familiarity to all of you in Southern California, particularly in San Diego, that de-energization has been done for over a decade on a consistent basis in San Diego. It has not been done with the other IOUs as consistently, nor as surgically. And the difference between that investor-owned utility and the one in the Northern California is the scale and scope and the lack of surgical focus on isolating those cutoffs versus the scale of the cutoffs in Northern California. A best practice, not just in this state, but across the country in how to approach this can be found at San Diego Gas and Electric. But that does not make them immune from inconsistencies in an adequate response to the moment we're in today.
Can you get the chief from CAL FIRE or Cal ODS, Mark, to talk about specifically for the Southern California region, the idea of how much we have as far as pre-deployed resources, where they might be, a little bit more specific?
You want to go first? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm happy to answer.
That's all right.
I don't have a uniform on, so it may not be as impressive.
We're one team, one fight.
Yeah, exactly. So in the southern part of the state, we have, and I neglected to say this previously, We also have added 5 very large air tankers statewide. 3 of those, are in Southern California currently, even with the fires going on up north. But what we've done is we've staffed up every piece of rolling equipment that we have. Engines, water tenders, bulldozers, everything is covered and everything is available to go to fires. So that's on the state side. Additionally, and Mark will cover the local government side, but we do have a map here that explains some of this. You can see on the map the large black dots, that's the local government. The rest of the area is covered by the very regional numbers that you can see in the balloon outs. Those are the CAL FIRE resources in the regional and then the local government. And we are very well positioned under the current circumstances to attack fires and keep them small. The difficulty is when the wrong fire starts with the right kind of conditions, which we have now in the wrong spot, it's very, very hard to control those, and sometimes the aircraft can't get to them and keep them small. Although 2 days ago, we knocked down 10 fires with aircraft and got our people on the ground to put lines around them before the winds blew them out here in Southern California.
Mark, anything you want to apply?
Yeah, let me just give you a quick rundown. In Southern California, in what we call OES Mutual Aid Region 1, which is Los Angeles County, we've got 2 Type 1 strike teams. That's 5 engines per strike team assigned to the Agoura Hills and Santa Clarita area, as well as we upstaffed 2 dispatchers to support an additional call volume that may come in. Santa Barbara County, we have a Type 3, which is a wildland strike team. That's 5 engines. They're staged in the central Santa Barbara area, as well as 1 task force. That's 4 Type 3 engines staged in Buellton, as well as we upstaffed a helicopter and a dispatcher in that area. In Ventura County, we have 1 Type 3 strike team. That's 5 engines staged at Camarillo, and 1 Type 1 hand crew. Those are the hardworking folks that cut line, staged in Oxnard. We upstaffed 1 dispatcher. In Orange County, we have 1 OES strike team of 5 engines staged in Yorba Linda, 1 Type 3 strike team, 5 engines staged in Buena Park, 1 hand crew staged in Irvine, and we upstaffed 1 dispatcher. And in the city of Los Angeles, we have 1 Type 3 strike team, 5 engines staged in Glendale, and 1 water tender staged in Pasadena. We upstaffed 1 dispatcher. And then in OES Region 6, which is our area of San Diego County, we have 1 OES Type 3 strike team, 5 engines, 1 Type 3 strike team of additional wildland engines of 5, staged in northern and southern San Diego County. We upstaffed 1 helicopter and some chief officers. In San Bernardino County, we have 1 OES Type 1 strike team, 5 engines, 1 Type 3 strike team, 5 engines, 2 bulldozers, 1 Type 1 crew staged at the base camp at Glen Helen, and we upstaffed 1 dispatcher. And in Riverside County, we have 2 Type 3 strike teams, that's 5 engines, staged at the Ben Clark Training Center, and we have upstaffed 1 dispatcher. So those are the Southern California ones. I didn't get into the Northern California ones. All of these assets are strategically placed based upon coordination with a local government, operational areas, and CAL FIRE to ensure that these assets can respond as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And in a program supported by the governor and recent funding, these assets are tracked by automatic vehicle location capability, so we can see on the big board where they're at, and as fires start, we can move them in a very expeditious manner to get on these fires very rapidly.
In addition to, by the way, all that, we've procured hundreds of new cameras for early detection, and when you guys are looking to your assignment editor saying, you know, what's the story this week, look into the work we're doing with satellite technology, which is novel, and LiDAR, as well as drone technology, all new assets this year for this year's fire season.
We're talking about electricity and talking about gas at this hour at the Southern Canyon Storage Facility for the ranch. There are protesters there right now demanding that that facility be shut down. They're demanding that the state step in and shut that facility down. Your thoughts?
Well, we're working aggressively to move forward with that transition. The previous administration talked about a 10-year transition. I talked about moving that forward. We have directed my EPA chair, Jared Bloomfeld, who's been personally working on this with Wade Crowfoot, the Department of Resources, to assess a timeline so that we can secure reliability for the region, but address the legitimate anxiety the community has. So that is a work in progress, but we hit the ground running during the transition, and I am committed to meeting a timeline that is substantially sooner than the one that was previously established by the state.
Have there been any additional efforts implemented to help medical baseline customers and those with disabilities specifically receive proper education?
This is a fabulous opportunity for our health director to answer a question.
Sure. Mark Alley, HHS Secretary for the state. HHS has 12 departments, and a number of offices have been deeply engaged in the preparatory efforts around the power shutoffs. Nearly 300 facilities, acute care, hospitals, nursing homes have been reached out to over the past couple of days to ensure that adequate power is available during the shutoff period, but also during the re-energizing period as well. We have no unmet needs at the moment. We've been in constant communication with those facilities, understanding how long they can go without power before additional generators are needed. And this is, in a way, even more proactive than we were 2 weeks ago during the Northern California shutoffs. In the way of supporting folks who have clear needs, we have been in contact with our labor partners and a number of folks who are tasked with in-home support services to ensure that they are reaching out to consumers and others that they support. We're urging all neighbors who know somebody who has medical needs, who have disabilities, who are frail and potentially or who are elderly, who may need water, power to charge up durable medical equipment, to go check on your neighbor. This is a great time. We hear about one team, one fight at the state. This is also an important aspect of caring for our communities. So we are working with those that the state employs to do that work, but we urge all neighbors to check on one another and make sure that if they need to be evacuated, that they take medications and durable medical equipment with them. We have a number of teams throughout the state that are there, prepared 40 ambulance strike teams, 20 in the north, 20 in the south, who are ready and available to transport people either out of facilities or out of their homes who have emergencies or needs that are being unmet, so that those clinical needs are well taken care of. We are also well prepared and understand that these events create anxiety and stress for a number of people. The governor talked eloquently about how nobody wants to be in this situation, but we are prepared with a number of hotline numbers, both state and federal, to support people through this anxiety-provoking phase.
So talking about that, though,
yeah.
Do you believe that the utility companies are giving, and particularly those residents who depend on power for their medical needs, are the utility companies giving them ample notice to prepare? Because we know that some people have been put at serious risk, their health.
So I'm not prepared to speak to what the utilities companies are doing themselves on that front. As far as Health and Human Services, when we have a couple of key databases for people either on Medicare or in Medicaid who have durable medical equipment needs, who have high medical needs, and we have been able to proactively identify those in certain de-energized areas and give them notice that we will need to stay assessing their needs and supporting them if in the event that they need to be transported out of their current living environment so that they can safely and adequately use any medical equipment that is life-saving and critical to their lives. Yeah, they are indeed heartbreaking, and we continue at the governor's direction to increase our ability to identify those folks and make those notifications. We are I know that particular case that you're describing is being currently investigated, and hopefully we can continue to increase our own ground game across the state to ensure that events like that don't take place again.
And Mark, just maybe you can amplify the protocols, and this goes back to the protocols and the engagement, and there's been some improvements from broad engagement to now more targeted engagement at the city and county level to assess the unique needs within each city and county, not the aggregate needs of all of the counties, but maybe you can amplify some of that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. To be clear, the case you're talking about, just before I get to that, was in El Dorado County, and the coroner did determine that the cause of death was not related to the power shutoff. So I know there's been some misinformation on that, and I want to make sure that you know, and you can look that up to confirm that. With regards to medical baseline,
By the way, that's not to suggest the premise of your question is not spot on.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I was just going to say that the whole topic of medical baseline continues to be a challenge with the utilities in their ability to have a granular situational awareness of that particular customer base. Historically, the way the system works is that people can register as a medical baseline customer by checking a box. It gives an indication that to the utility that there's a person with some sort of a medical condition there, but the utility does not know what the medical condition is. And so we have been working with utilities to try to further engage and find a way to be able to reach out to each one of those respective individuals to determine what their specific need is. The utilities have been focusing on preparedness messages to say you should be prepared in the event that the power goes out. You should have backup power. And the reality is many of these folks don't have resources to do that or have the ability to do that. And so part of that is we have been working with local government and the utilities to try to identify those folks and have local government reach out to their citizens, and for those individuals that need additional assistance, if they need emergency power or support, there are programs that we have encouraged the utilities to provide those individuals. And of course, if the individuals get to the point, we want them to have partnerships with family or friends or neighbors. If that does not work, then obviously 911 is the way that we want to get to those folks. But it is, I'm not to say it is a fixed problem. It is an ongoing challenge with the utilities, and it's a little bit convoluted because of HIPAA requirements and other kinds of things that exist. And it is something that we have been working with the access and functional needs community to address that.
Residents are really ticked off. They're about as pissed off as the government.
Yes, I'm aware of it.
That these utilities should have had stuff like this in place years ago, prepared for events like this, and so we'd be ahead of the game. So that remains an issue. Governor,
100%. And now I own this. I get it. It's on me to make sure this doesn't happen again. I say I'm not making any damn excuses, but it's not a 9-year administration. And we hit the ground running. It wasn't but more than 24 hours after I got sworn in that we were out up in Placer County doing some vegetation management work. I pulled the damn National Guard off that political duty at the border and brought them up to start doing the work. I mean, I wish we had been at this for decades. I wish, PG&E didn't exist as a corpus as it exists today. All this stuff doesn't matter to anybody. What they want is this fixed, and they want accountability, and they want us to be forthright, and they want us to be honest about this, and that is my job, and that's why I want to make myself available on a consistent basis so we can talk through these issues.
And to follow up on that, the Woolsey Fire After Action report just came out yesterday, and one of the things they said was that mutual aid was stretched thin at that point in time. We had the campfire, we had other things. You said that we've got more pre-positioned, there's been more budgeted. Are we prepared that we won't see that same sort of stretch happen this time if we see similar situations?
Well, I mean, you can never make that claim. I mean, because they're always the extremes are such that was I don't want to say without precedent, but that was one of the most acute moments in California's history. That said, we didn't have the resources that we have today, so we're a hell of a lot more prepared this year for that kind of circumstance. But there's no question in my mind, and this is a preview of January's budget, that we have a lot more work to do, and we have to make a substantial increase in these investments. So it is the top priority. Public safety is the top priority, and so that will be reflected in January's budget. And by the way, that budget is being put together as we speak, and it has to be locked in by the first week of December.
Governor, along those same lines, is there any, with power outages, what is being done, or is there a concern with areas especially where broadband might be kind of hinky, with the power outages, people getting enough information to know what's happening and to know when it's time to evacuate?
This is what he does.
So it's a great question, and the issue does reside, and we know that there are times when during disasters, and certainly we saw it in fires and with PSPSs, that those cell sites that people depend upon go down. And, you know, most of them are supposed to have either battery backup for a period of time or have some sort of a fuel generator backup system. But look, not all of them do, and we are aware of that. And again, much like the utilities that we are having to deal with in turning the power on and off, we are having to deal with the telecommunications industry that has a set of unilateral priorities. And our role is to make sure that we can get them aligned with what the public safety priorities of the state are. And so in this case, we have brought in the main telecommunication providers into the State Operations Center and embedded them there, giving them metrics to ensure that cell sites remain operational during the period of the PSPS. They, in turn, have brought in generators from their storage lots all over the country, and there's almost 137 major generators that they brought in for their key sites throughout the state that they're implementing. But again, make no mistake about it, this is an issue where we should not have to, you know, beat up the telecommunication industry to align with the public safety priorities of the state. This should be something that they come in woefully, and it's their job to keep their systems as resilient and up to date as possible to withstand the kind of events that we see in this state, which are earthquakes and fires and floods, and now public safety power shutoffs.
Governor, Democrats have been in charge of this state for a long time. You were lieutenant governor before this. What went wrong in terms of...
I'm not looking back. I'm taking responsibility, and I'm moving forward, period. And we have reflected on the areas of weakness, and we've tried to address those, and we started in January that process through executive order, through emergency appropriations, through pre-positioning, through a budget that was historic. And so we've assessed that, and I'm focusing now on fast-tracking the implementation and application of all of those efforts, and then holding these utilities accountable.
Your bottom line message to people who are frustrated by what's happening, frustrated when their power goes out.
We're leaning in it. Look, they have every right to be frustrated. They have every right to be outraged. And I deeply resent that they have to go through this process. And we're going to hold the IOUs, the utilities, accountable. And we're going to make sure people are compensated for this. And we're going to make sure we do everything in our power to negate the need to do this moving forward by holding them accountable to the commitments that they're required under the legislation we passed to substantially improve their system, to harden their transmission lines, to underground them in vulnerable areas, to continue the vegetation management and forest management work, to invest in new technologies and microgrids, in innovation, so that this does not have to occur in the future. This is not and cannot be the new normal.
Clarity on the stat that you gave, you said the 600 fires, and you also mentioned there was 600.
609, yeah, fire.
Just report 13.
Yeah, that was
Two stats.
During the last event, and I'll give you the dates, it was 24-hour periods of the 8th through the 12th of October. And this is just the state, CAL FIRE responded to 1,305 fires during that period. The ones that you saw in the news and you reported on in the news are the only ones that anyone reflected on. The rest of almost 1,300 fires were put out without any news. And then the other period was from the 21st, Monday, through the 23rd, that was midnight last night, 607 fires.
I mean, for all the Dodger fans, unlike baseball, in public life, you don't get credit for saves. Anybody else?
Recently, at Fort Ranch Fire, I had a house burning in front of me, no fire trucks, and when it showed up, I think the capacity of the truck was about 400 to 500 gallons of water. They ran out of water, they had to leave. There was a 10,000-gallon pool in the backyard. And recently, we've been getting stories of public buying these big pumps, pump the water out, protect their homes. Is there a possibility we can look into, if we don't have it already, mobile, large capacity pumps that can go right where the police or the fire trucks? 10,000 gallons fill a lot of fire trucks.
Yeah. No, well, Chief will talk a lot about technology that we do have in partnership with local mutual aid.
Yeah, and first, that is a capability that exists in the system already. We have pumps that we can put in pools, pump water out of pools. We also have the ability, if you can get an engine up close, you can draft water out to fill an engine. That is a difficult process when you're in a going firefight. And what we do in a going firefight is we use as little water as possible and we keep moving with the fire. Sometimes that means a fire that starts in a structure is not going to get put out, unfortunately. However, we do have that capability, and we will continue to invest in those capabilities. The governor authorized us to and funded us to put 13 new fire engines throughout the state. They have capabilities like that. They are dispersed throughout the state and on these fires currently.
Is there mobile trucks you can put for with big boards, with that public will come in and need? Where is the fire? Where is
So
the
for-
fire department? My house is burning. There's water in the backyard.
Yeah.
Or next door, there's a $10,000 pool in the backyard. Can't you get like mobile trucks instead of fire engines to, you know?
These are great questions. Yeah, thank you. And these are great questions. We are looking at all capabilities of modernizing our response and adjusting our tactics where possible.
Governor, I just have one more thing to say, and I noticed this, you didn't just walk in here, you kind of stormed in here, and you seemed to throw the political cloak off your back, and you stepped right up there.
Is that how it appeared? All right.
So again,
Yeah.
what ticks you off the most about this entire scenario?
That we're here, that this is California, this is America in 2019. I mean, look, this state is hitting on all cylinders. We just enjoyed our lowest unemployment rate in recorded history, 115 consecutive months of net job creation, unprecedented surpluses, paying down pension obligations, GDP growth, which is the envy of the nation. There's an enormous amount good and right about this state. But the idea in this state of innovation, where the future happens first, where innovation runs through our veins, that we have investor-owned utilities, some of the largest in the world, not just in the United States, that can't keep the damn lights on, that's just fundamentally unacceptable. And people should be outraged by that. And I feel that outrage intensely. And you know what? No one cares about my outrage. They want me to fix it. And I get that. And and if I could, I'd throw a magic wand in the air, and we would modernize 100,000 miles of transmission lines tomorrow. And we'd call it a day. But I know that can't be done. And so the sober reality is, I'm expecting I may be in front of the mic in the near future, yet again, being held to account. But I'm going to hold myself to a higher level of accountability, I promise you, than even my worst critics. I hear them loudly, and they are right to be angry. You don't have to internalize it. They have the right. No, they're not. I'm pointing my fingers. I look in the mirror. End of the day, no one cares who's to blame. They want to know what the hell we're going to do. And you know the person that's accountable for doing that? The person that took the oath of office 9 months ago in the state of California. And that's now on my watch, and I have that accountability. That's not something politically that one normally asserts, but it's the reality. And so I have a unique role and responsibility to play to meet the expectations, the minimum expectations that the public have. And I am going to hold the folks behind me accountable and my entire team, but also we have got to hold these corporate investor-owned utilities to a much higher level of accountability. And that's where the public utility is going to come in, and you're going to see a much more assertive and aggressive stance in the next few months, as we have in the last few months moving forward.
So Governor, then what does all of this look like? Because states all across the country have pandered to the utilities.
That's right.
So are you talking about a complete restructuring of how we get our power? Or, I mean, because this has been consistent in all 50 states.
Yeah, no, New York's experiencing power shutoffs as well. We have to assess all of that, and the nature of how these investor-owned utilities exist and how they are quasi-monopolies within their jurisdictions. The size and scope and scale of these public utilities, or rather investor-owned utilities. The advent of new community choice aggregation, new municipal players in this market, new technologies and microgrids that I referenced a moment ago allow for a different conversation than the one we've had in the past. So it's a combination of all these factors. The perversity of bankruptcy is it provides an opportunity to address these issues in a much more dynamic way. And our goal, stated goal, legislative goal, with a lot of conditions, incentives and disincentives attached, is by June 30th of next year to get the largest investor-owned utility out of bankruptcy, to secure stronger bond status for the other two investor-owned utilities so that they have easier access of money so they can make their commensurate investments. So we stabilize that infrastructure. And then we provide more choice and more opportunities for a more dynamic and arguably decentralized system that can protect and preserve not just the taxpayers, but the ratepayers, and moreover, the public safety in the state.
Some people are saying that PG&E is using that June 30th deadline to keep wildfire claimants out of the bankruptcy.
Well, they have to look. They're not going to get out of bankruptcy unless they settle those cases, and they better focus on that quickly. They also aren't going to get out of bankruptcy unless they submit to the requirements under our legislation on public safety improvements, billions and billions of dollars of investments, and we want to see demonstrable examples of those projects being complete. They have a series of responsibilities and requirements that we laid out. And again, the Public Utilities Commission is going to be very transparent and very forceful in holding them accountable and bringing to light those provisions on a consistent basis so that the public is clued in and not reacting to a crisis, one that we're experiencing today. Thank you guys for having me.